is a fun time. It has good characterization for Gray. It provides more world building with the introduction of another demon created by Zeref in the form of Deliora, and for all of its faults, was a consistently enjoyable watch throughout. So I really can't complain too much here. So let's move on to the... So we get a Lucy arc. Sorta, kinda, not really. This is one of those stretches that has a lot of standout moments, but the elements that make up the whole just don't mesh well at all. And it's all wrapped up in a conflict I could give less than a shit about. Levy McGarden and her team, who were introduced a few episodes earlier, are suddenly attacked after the Fairy Tail Guildhall is destroyed, both by Blacksteel Gajiel of the Phantom Lord Guild. In response, Fairy Tail accepts the obvious challenge and the guild war ensues. That's literally it. There's no real mystery, none of the villains have any kind of development, the heroes definitely don't have any development, and the Phantom Lord Guild is motivated exclusively by money, as Lucy's rich father paid to have her returned home because she ran away. If I'm being honest, I feel like this arc would have worked better later on in the series, say after the Edelus or Arashian Sace arcs, where we're much more privy to how the various members feel about their guild pride and defending their comrades. As is, this is the first major conflict most of these characters have been a part of, and though everyone except for Natsu ultimately plays only a small part, the only thing we have to go off of is that they want to defend their guild. This is a conflict born out of desperation, and while that can certainly be made interesting, the show does little to endear me to anyone in particular by using this trope. I guess you get some stuff of Kana leading the C-list members against the Shades, you get some setup for Loki's mini arc that comes next, you have some stuff, but here's the problem with all that. The motivation for this arc is Lucy, and Lucy doesn't fucking do anything. In her own arc, the only one she gets, focusing on her and her past in the manga at least, Lucy Heartfilia is reduced to a damsel in distress plot device. We'll be going into Lucy herself momentarily, but for now, that's just an awful decision from a narrative standpoint. Why doesn't Lucy get to defend her own honor, fight for her own destiny? Even if she ends up losing, why doesn't she get to fight Gajiel, or any of the Element 4 that make up the big bads of the arc? Hell, wouldn't it have been the most badass thing to have Lucy take Urza's place in holding off Jose? There's an extended fight scene in the last part of the arc that gets cut to every now and then, and nothing happens here until Makarov shows up. And Lucy could have filled the role that Urza plays after everyone else in the guild had been downed. How badass would that have been? Yeah, she would have gotten absolutely stomped, but imagine the willpower that it would display to stand up and keep fighting for the right to exist as her own person. Instead, you just get Urza in a nothing battle that goes nowhere except to stall for Makarov to come in and auto-win the war with his big fuck-off magic spell. And hey, that's not to say that this arc is all bad. I like the setup that Loki has, and it leads nicely into his story, and I like the Elfman episode where we get to learn of the most interesting backstory in the series from a character perspective. See, Elfman and Mira Jane, two of Fairy Tail's mainstays that have been around since episode 2, used to have a third sibling, Lizana, whom Natsu was especially close to. In the past, Mira Jane took her siblings on an S-class quest that went out of control. Elfman, using his takeover magic, tried to stop the beast that they were hunting only to lose control himself, savagely beating Mira Jane and ultimately killing Lizana in cold blood. This is a huge, heavy bit of storytelling and is paid off brilliantly by Elfman overcoming his weakness to save Mira Jane after she's taken prisoner by Phantom Lord. Unfortunately, this is the start and end of Elfman's character arc in the entire show. He doesn't have to wrestle with the knowledge that he killed his little sister, and no ill will is ever born over that fact, even from Natsu. Now, I have a huge soft spot for the Strauss siblings, as I think the differing ways that they coped with Lizana's death, where Elfman resolved to man up and not make that mistake again, while Mira Jane essentially pulled a Mitra Surik and cut off her connection to magic to save herself from the expectations she failed to meet in losing her, were well done and extremely engaging. But again, nothing else is done with it. It's one of the series' biggest missed opportunities, and all because they're both side characters. What a shame. As well, in another positive moment, and though I think it's a moment that would have benefited the most from this arc taking place later in the show's run, when Natsu recalls memories he's had in the old Fairy Tail Guildhall as it's completely destroyed during his battle against Gajiel was excellent, providing the first of few instances where the power of friendship isn't overplayed, and instead is a small yet potent push towards continuing to stand and fight despite all hope being lost. Particularly good is the brand new flashback where Natsu childishly displays his grief and in pain when he isn't able to read his first job request. So the guild comes to his defense, and Urza in particular offers to teach Natsu whatever Igneo was unable to teach him before he disappeared. Finally, Fairy Law is just badass. I think it's the single most creative and excellently used spell in the entire series, despite basically just being a big fuck-off light blast attack. Its mechanics are where it differentiates itself, only affecting those which the caster perceives as their enemies within their own hearts. In this case, Makarov perceives Josei and his shades as enemies, and it completely annihilates them. And then he just says to behave and walks off. What an absolute unit. Overall, however, the biggest problem with this arc is that Phantom Lord are terrible villains. Remember, this is just a guild war for money. There is no deep character-driven motivation, there is no grand plan, nothing. I'm not saying we've had a good villain yet. The first, in my opinion, comes in the arc just after this, but at least Leon had a bit of depth to his character, even if that depth is as shallow as a rain puddle. Josei is in it for the money and because he's jealous of Fairy Tail, and his lackeys don't have any identifiable motivation other than being part of this antagonistic group that the heroes have to fight. I sure hope this problem doesn't continue with future groups of enemies. I think that Gajiel, as the second Dragon Slayer wizard introduced, was an interesting character, at least in concept, but he only becomes so after Natsu defeats him. They have a conversation where they discover that Natsu's adoptive father, the dragon Igneel, and Gajiel's adoptive father, the dragon Metallicana, both disappeared on the exact same day, providing a small bit of mystery as to why there are no more dragons in the world. However, better for Gajiel was the seemingly antagonistic view he has of Metallicana, not only providing a counterpoint to Natsu's worship of Igneel, but hinting at how poorly Gajiel took his foster father's disappearance. That could lead really well into what happens later when Makarov makes the controversial decision to invite Gajiel into Fairy Tail since he has nowhere else to go. I could see Gajiel becoming fiercely loyal to Makarov for being the father figure he still obviously needed, but again, nothing is ever really done with this, and in fact, I have many problems with where Gajiel eventually goes as a character, where he's routinely shafted and made into the worst ship in the entire series. But we'll get into that briefly during the Tenro Island arc. Anyway, back to this arc holistically. Let's look at the order of events here. So Gajiel messes up the guild hall, attacks a, frankly, C-list team in Levi, Jet, and Droy, and then Fairy Tail retaliates. According to everything that's shown, the only reason Fairy Tail didn't win the war right then and there is because Makarov got cheap-shotted and Josei was too strong for the other members. Everyone else in the Phantom Lord Guild was either shown to be a chump or was Gajiel, who at that point was faced with his allies getting pummeled, and then he'd have to deal with Natsu, Gray, Elfman, and Erza, along with many C-listers at once. Hell, after that, Natsu, Elfman, and Gray each defeat one of the Element 4 without much trouble, while Erza defeats hers in a single attack after she was completely drained of magic power by blocking a big laser beam earlier. These are supposed to be the strongest wizards Phantom Lord has other than Gajiel, who Natsu summarily defeats shortly after that, albeit with a little bit of help from Lucy. And that's not even mentioning Loxus, Mystigan, or Guildarts, three wizards who are by all accounts far stronger than even Erza, not to mention future villains who have a vested interest in members of Fairy Tail like Jalal and Mardgeir, let alone Zeref. It's a case where once you learn how important Fairy Tail members are to these people, it becomes absolutely laughable to assume that they would allow any battle to take place where there is a serious chance of their prizes being killed. And of course, at the time, Mashima didn't know half of this stuff, but even disregarding that, there's still the evidence I laid out above with the other S-class Fairy Tail wizards. Aside from Josei, who Makarov beats in one attack by the way, no wizard in Phantom Lord is shown to even hold a candle to the Fairy Tail crew, so it's just as laughable to think that they ever stood a chance in this guild war. Look, the fight against Gajiel is cool and all, and I like how it was resolved with teamwork rather than brute willpower, but the fact of the matter is that there are simply no stakes in this arc. In the Galuna Island and Lullaby arcs, there was the looming threat of the demons that were to be unleashed by the villains, even if they ultimately didn't matter. That alone was enough to drive the drama and push the heroes into a sense of desperation, but nothing is really here for that. When the heroes don't have such desperation, at least not anything that's justified, you need some secondary element, a character arc, drama between characters, or an interesting mystery. And we'll see that many of the best arcs have all three, like the next one. But that just leaves Phantom Lord all the more barren of substance. But then we come to the Lucy problem. This is an issue that's not unique to this arc, by the way, but permeates throughout the entire show. Lucy is a terrible character and doesn't deserve to be in Fairy Tail. I wouldn't call her a Mary Sue so much as an author's pet, with the difference being that Mary Sues are great at everything, while authors' pets tend to have everything given to them regardless of how worthy they are to receive it, and the author tries their damnedest to make the audience feel like this character is worthy, and then they usually fail. Lucy is a rich kid who ran away from home because her mom died and her dad didn't love her because evil businessman. I would give it more nuance than that, as I did Gray and will do Urza, but that's literally the start and end of what we learn about her past. Her father, who is ostensibly the antagonist of this arc, as he's the one who hired Phantom Lord to capture Lucy, gets a single scene to his name, and that's after everything is said and done and it's just Lucy telling him off. What a complete joke. This backstory is in contrast to Gray, whose home was rent to ash by a hell demon and whose only remaining maternal figure sacrificed her life to save him, where then he's forced to live with the guilt of being the cause of the conflict that ultimately killed her. Elfman, who only gets a single episode, also has an infinitely more engaging backstory than spoiled rich girl over here. Now, I'm not trying to downplay how damaging the emotional neglect of a parent can be, but fucking Urza was a literal slave. The things don't equate. This leads into my larger issue with her, however, in that Mashima has to constantly invent C-list, no, not even that, Z-list villains for her to even have a chance at overcoming because she has no real ability on her own. Her entire gimmick, her magic, is to summon various celestial spirits that are based off of the constellations. Okay, so she summons them, and then all she can really do is react to the ensuing fight. This isn't a Pokemon battle. Lucy isn't really giving direct orders to the spirits, but rather vague suggestions, while the spirits themselves are wholly autonomous fighters that make their own decisions. This style of magic leaves very, very little room for Lucy to be at all useful or even really comparable to literally any other wizard in the guild. So what ends up happening? Like I said, Mashima invents Z-list villains. This happens in the Arashi on Seis arc, the Tenro Island arc. She is severely violated in the Grand Magic games by being a Videl-like punching bag to show how evil Raventail is. This happens in the Key of the Starry Sky arc. Her main fight in the Eclipse Celestial Spirits arc is mainly used for fetish bait, and I can go on and on and on. Lucy is just not respected as a wizard, and her fights are either just her reacting to other people doing the work, having to be aided by a cooler character like in the Tower of Heaven arc, or used as comedic relief like in the Tenro Island arc. I have yet to see a Lucy fight where she is a badass. Now, that's not to say that she doesn't have her moments, which we'll be getting to later, namely in the Loki mini arc and the Key of the Starry Sky arc. Putting that aside though, now that we've determined that she's completely useless in-universe, let's zoom out to see if she makes sense in the narrative. What role does she serve as part of Team Natsu, if not in a combat-oriented role? In a team setting, you usually have one character who isn't as focused on combat, but brings another equally useful skill to the table. In Hunter x Hunter, for example, you have Leorio, who offers a more well-adjusted human perspective, which contrasts with the other three's strange and sometimes disturbing values. In Dragon Ball, Bulma was the tech girl and driver, who often aided the heroes with her various gadgets, or, was the eye candy for the pervert characters that they kept running into. In Naruto, Sakura was the useless one that made Naruto and Sasuke look cool by comparison, even though they were also sniffling brats, at least in part 1. In my head, if I were designing Lucy from the ground up as part of this group, I would make her the magic knowledge expert. Say she spent her childhood reading everything she could about random magical whatsits in lieu of her father's neglect, which could help with exposition and figuring out magic-related mysteries, such as the one on Galuna Island, or Tower of Heaven, or even Daedalus. Well, Lucy doesn't have a role outside of combat. I mean, if you need help specifically with things regarding celestial spirits that she has access to, yeah, she can be pretty knowledgeable. But other than that, she's as clueless as Natsu is about most things that happen to them throughout the series. I truly don't understand why she was included other than to copy from other more successful shonens. Nami from One Piece comes to mind with her over-the-top reactions to the shenanigans that occur throughout the show's run, but I think it's more likely that she was just a carryover from from Rave Master, who had a similar main duo to Natsu and Lucy in Fairy Tail. It's a pair that Mashima likes to use a lot, and I can't say I'm a fan. Finally, let's zoom out even further. If she doesn't make sense as a member of Team Natsu, and doesn't make sense from a narrative party comp perspective, maybe she serves a thematic purpose, because Fairy Tail does indeed have themes, however shallow they may be at times. In general, the values of the members of Fairy Tail run the same. Take pride in your guild, don't hurt people for your own gain, magic is alive and should be used to express yourself. That's kind of the basic gist of every major character and their ideals. Does this make every character boring and samey? Yes. However, what separates them is the different things that Fairy Tail itself means to them. For our main group, it's a place to belong. Each member of Natsu, Lucy, Gray, and Urza lost their place in the world and found it again by becoming a part of Fairy Tail. Their very identities ride on them being a part of this found family, and their loyalty stems from the part that Fairy Tail played in them overcoming their respective traumas. I very much like this setup for a main group. It offers them a cohesion that's lacking when characters like Elfman, Loki, or Kana butt in during some arcs, and gives us a very good reason to want to see them stay together, because we've seen where they came from and the hardship that they shouldn't have to endure alone. The issue with this is one that I brought up earlier. Lucy's hardships simply don't equate to the other three. Unlike the others, she grew up in a well-adjusted family and a very successful one. We can surmise that she had a strong bond with her mother before her passing, and we see how well she was cared for by the staff at her father's estate. Yes, being brushed off by her father must have been hard, and yes, leaving to become her own person was definitely the best thing for her development as an individual, but by and large, Lucy doesn't need Fairy Tail in the same way that Natsu or Urza do. She becomes a Fairy Tail wizard and is a part of the family, but her declaration of love for being a part of it and her despair at being faced with leaving it rings hollow, especially after we see where she came from. The more that we see of different characters' backstories except Kana, the more that we see that Lucy had it pretty damn good, all things considered. All in all, Lucy just doesn't work on any level for me. She has a super cute design, especially later on when she gets the pigtails and ponytail with the time skips, and honestly, I find most of the less over-the-top reactions she has to be pretty funny, such as the pillow fight scene in the Loki mini arc just after this. However, by and large, I just wish she wasn't a part of this show, because she takes time away from other characters that I'm much more invested in. At the end of the day, she's just taking up space and screen time, and like all of Mashima's female characters, her knockers take up a lot of space and screen time, and we'll leave the discussion of her there. The final thing to talk about is the opening for this arc, and I think I speak for a lot of people in saying that it's bad. It doesn't convey the right emotions for how seriously this arc takes itself, the framing is all wrong with the Natsu versus Gajeel fight, and the song is just trite J-pop nonsense, being Sense of Wonder by Idling. No, what I want to talk about is just how terrible the sync effort is with these openings, and this will be a problem, like, until the Arashi and Seis arc. This opening started playing in episode 12, which is 2 episodes into the Galuna Island arc out of an eventual 10 episodes. Conversely, the third opening, which is set to the backdrop of the Tower of Heaven arc and features heavy spoilers for it, begins playing in episode 25, which is barely halfway through the Phantom Lord arc. This is honestly an even bigger problem in the Tower of Heaven arc itself, as the fourth opening explicitly shows that Urza survives, where her death is a constant looming danger throughout the Tower of Heaven arc that it precedes, ruining any tension if you watch the openings during your binge. Now, I do sort of understand why they did this. The arcs don't cleanly split like in some other shows. You had 3 different stories play out before the Lullaby arc, so trying to match the first intro to all 4 of them would have been a nightmare. And the Lullaby arc only lasted until episode 10 if you include anime filler and the Natsu vs. Urza Seagrain introduction episode in there. So that would have been a waste of effort, and that in turn messed up everything else for future openings, as arcs continued to last an uneven number of episodes, making planning out openings very sketchy. But I don't know, I think a more elegant solution would have just been to have an opening last a bit longer and maybe some last a bit shorter, and maybe sync them up with the arcs that they correspond to avoid major spoilers. Am I crazy for that? Thankfully, with the Arashi and Seis arc, they not only started adapting longer arcs, but started using 2 openings per arc, meaning that they could more freely split them up how they needed to without fearing spoilers and mental whiplash. I mean, this came with its own set of problems, namely that the first opening of each arc is kind of a dud usually, but whatever, still preferable. Overall, the Phantom Lord arc sits comfortably below the Galuna Island arc for me in terms of preference. It features the first structured instance of an enemy team fighting one-on-one matches against our group of heroes. It introduced both Gajiel and Juvia, who I neglected to mention, who both become mainstays for the remainder of the series, and it gave Lucy a backstory, I guess. Kinda sucks that Lucy is a bad character, but anyway, up next, we're going to be skipping the Loki mini arc for now, so let's jump straight into a fan favorite arc, the...
Nope.